Good morning, or for those on the East Coast, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The FDW Corporation's series of webinars. We have a good one lined up for you today, and I see a lot of people still coming online. So while they do that, we'll run through a few of the housekeeping bits of information, and then we'll get things started in just a moment. First of all, you've tuned in to watch the presentation on sports sound. My role here is the training director at FDW. We're always on the lookout for interesting topics, particularly for those in contracting and those that are serving the commercial audio needs. I think today's presentation will be a very meaty one. We will be recording this so that if you have co-workers that you would like to clue into this, or if you have to step out and miss part of it, rest assured it is being recorded, so it will be available for you to be able to tune in at a later date and catch what you missed. Beyond that, if you have questions today, and I suspect that you will, it's a big deck of slides that we're going to go through, but invariably there will be something that you think of that you would like us to address. Please make use of the question feature in GoToWebinar, and if you type those questions to us, we'll accumulate those, and I promise at the end of the presentation we will address each of those and try and come up with answers for you. So please make use of that within the GoToWebinar screens that you see. With that, I also invite you to make use of the survey. We would very much like you to complete the survey before you exit the webinar. At the end of the webinar, if you do that, that'll help us make the content of webinars even better, and we appreciate that very much. So now I see quite a few more people have signed online, so I think it's a good time to introduce our presenter today. For this topic of sound in arenas and what happens inside the sports facility to sound and how to best treat that, we have an excellent spokesperson who has a very distinguished background in that field. Dave Howden of Community Loudspeakers, Community Pro, is here. And Dave, in looking through your slides, I can't imagine there would be any questions that are not covered, but I suspect there will be. Thank you for joining us, Dave.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Dave Howden. As I said, I'm Director of Technical Services with Community Loudspeakers here in beautiful Chester, Pennsylvania, and I'll be guiding you through some of the fundamentals of outdoor, and we'll touch a little bit on indoor sports sound design also. This presentation is based on our available. I believe the handout was made available for our sports sound layout options guide. So make sure you grab that, use it as a reference, as that's what we'll be basing all of this on. So, couple things to as was mentioned, make sure you submit your questions for the Q&A at the end. Anything I don't cover, once again, this is pretty condensed, but we'll get the questions. We'll get to all the questions that we can. So, sports sound, as I said, our loudspeaker system design reference guide. The systems that we're going to be speaking about here, I'm going to go over them briefly. Our small R series, our R.25 94Zs, R.35 coax, which is a 10-inch base reflex box, R.35 3896, which is a compact three-way system using our co-entrant mid-range horns. Really a stellar performer in a compact package with excellent voice clarity. As we move up in size, I think most people are probably very familiar with the R.5s, or about a 16-inch cube, 3 different patterns available. They're available as a low impedance model, or there is, if you want the 70 volt, 100 volt model, just add a T suffix to any of the model numbers above. They go up to some of our, one of our newer products, our R.5 96 Max. There's also a 60 by 60 version of this too. We were challenged to create a higher output system in the same size, basically 16-inch cube enclosure, and we certainly accomplished that with this system, which has a 600 watt continuous power rating and a 1.4-inch exit compression driver. Certainly a step up in sensitivity and output capability if you apply additional amplifier power, of course. And then where it all started, the R2 series. We're going to concentrate on the R294Z and the R252 in here. I think everybody's very familiar with these. You know, this is a system that really started setting the standard and really changed the way that people perceive sound in outdoor facilities and also many indoor facilities. So I mentioned the R252Z. It's our long throw model, our 50 by 20 system. It's a 4-ohm system. Something that you usually throw about 1 kilowatt of power at 4 ohms. But these are typically used for just longer projections, whether you're projecting from a scoreboard or across to the visitor side from from a light pole. But we'll get into those details. And the latest addition to the R series, just a quick sampling here, is the R252 Max. There's 4 other models, or 3 other models of the R252 Max available. It's notable that these are biamp systems. And when we get up into these 1200 watt continuous power handlings, it really makes sense to biamp these systems. But with amplifier power being very affordable these days, it's not a problem, and it really allows us to get the most out of all of these systems without sacrificing any of the quality or any of the losses inherent in passive crossovers. Most people know that the R series all do carry a 15-year structural warranty, standard warranty on the components, 5 years against defects. I will say that these systems, they've been out in the field now for a good 19 years now. I think it's closer to 18 years. And the cabinets are going to last forever. Perhaps a customer, depending on the environment they're using them in, maybe 12, 14 years down the line, they're just going to need new components. The fiberglass will be fine. We've never had to replace, an R2, R5, R series cabinet, because of any sort of structural issues. So something to certainly keep in mind when somebody asks, how long is this system going to last me? Mine's going to last longer than any other system that was on the market or probably will be on the market anytime soon. Putting a couple of accessories I want to talk about, pole mount solutions. We do provide some cost-effective pole mount solutions for the smaller systems. You need to go to at least a 6-inch diameter round pole with our PMB1RR and PMB2RR. If you look briefly here, the PMB1RR on the left, it's, you fasten it to the pole, you sort of, turn it around the pole, the direction the speaker, needs to aim, aim sound at people or area of interest, and then you have all the tilt capability up and down that you need. Although we would never tilt an R series speaker up because it's going to turn into a bird bath. That's not warranty. R series speakers have to be fired, straight out or angled downward, but never up, not even a little bit. The PMB2RR, shown on the right, will accommodate a couple of R series cabinets. You get both pan and tilt capability. It's notable that the top speaker, there is a tilt limitation, but if you look at the manual for the PMB system, it'll give you the limitations by system. So the PMB1R, just briefly here, they're compatible with the small R series, R.15 coax up through the R5 series, the voice systems, RMG, R5V2200. Our smaller wet series, our compact, new premium performance I series systems. If you need to, pole mount an R1, an R2, or an R6, you need to use a third-party mount. One of our go-tos is the Allen Products Polestar systems. There's a number of configurations available, whether you're mounting a single speaker or if you need to mount multiple speakers. On the right-hand side image shows, mount partially up, and I think it ended up with a couple of R.5 speakers on the left and right side of that mount where you see the holes. But Allen Products, they're certainly the experts when it comes to this, so feel free to lean on them for the support and make sure you're getting the correct mount for your application. A couple mounting tips. we're hanging speakers above people's heads many times, and we always want to consult with a professional engineer before attaching speakers to structures. It's not so much about the weight of the speaker, it's about the wind profile. Or when we start talking about that within the engineering side, it's the EPA, the effective projected area. That is basically how big of a wind load is it going to create? With the wind blowing towards a speaker, possibly from the side. We have these figures for the asking, but typically something like an R2, it's when you do the calculations, it's about a 7 square foot wind load that it's creating. So this is something that you certainly want to consider in any sort of mounting scenario, and a professional engineer can help you through that. Speakers always need a safety point, and it needs to be attached to the speaker, not to the yoke. So in the case of our smaller PMB, ones, you might use a PMB one and run a safety cable down, to an eye bolt that's attached to an accessible point, within the loudspeaker or on the loudspeaker. Or in the case of our compact R series, there is a loop where you can swage your own safety cable through it. This is something in recent years, we need to make sure that mounting a third-party bracket to a pole won't void the pole warranty. There's a couple pole manufacturers out there that just don't want. It's a science problem. You place dissimilar metals against each other, there's the chance of galvanic corrosion, and there's plenty of guidance, depending on if you're working with a Musco or some other company, as far as what's acceptable to be touching their pole in order to maintain the warranty, for the pole and the lighting that is actually probably intended to support to begin with. But we like to use their poles whenever we can. But if you get in the game early enough, have the pole manufacturer supply some compatible mounting tabs whenever possible. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. Often, as we know, sound gets invited to the party late, and boy, poles are on site. Or in many cases, it's just an existing install. So you have to work with what you have available. This is our how far does it go chart. You'll find this in the sports guide, and it's a reference, and it's based on the recommended RMS power being applied to the speaker systems, and it shows how far away can I achieve about 96 decibels. This is kind of a quick reference. The quick reference. How far do I need to project sound? And somebody asks, why 96 decibels? Well, in my experience, 96 decibels is a pretty good level to aim for. If they can afford more, great. But at least from the R series speaker, 96 dB, that typically tells me that, okay, if I have crowd noise somewhere in the low 80s or something like that, low to mid 80s, I'll probably be able to have intelligible speech. In general, science has told us, and research studies have told us that the sound, when you project sound towards listeners, for intelligible audio, you need to have at least 10 decibels, preferably up to 15 decibels over the ambient noise. Now we're not gonna try and get over the people when they're having their moment, as we call it, because the team just scored or some big event just happened. But in general, if the background noise is somewhere in the 80s, low 80s, which I find is pretty typical in high school scenarios, or even smaller collegiate type scenarios, aiming for a 96 dB level at least, they'll typically get allow you to have intelligible speech most of the time. So we kind of split up these suggestions, and these are all just design suggestions into a good, better, best sort of scenario. So let's jump right into it here. Football field, standard size football field. Could be a small collegiate, could be your local town high school. The first example we're going to take a look at is going to be the press box mounted system. Now, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of placing the speakers on the press box, but let's face it, with our years of providing design support for our customers, we found that it's usually the lowest cost installation and the easiest installation. There's a lot of variables. Are they going to let you actually drill, into the roof of this thing or mount a structure on it, whether it's, a unistrut structure that you roll or a local steel shop puts together. But more often than not, systems end up going on top of the press box for ease of install. So in this scenario here, I do like to get the speakers as high up as possible on top of the press box in order to avoid blowing the people out right in front of it. I'll seriously lobby to get a little bit of extra elevation. If I can't at least have the speakers 12 to 16 feet above people's heads, maybe it's a two-story press box, and then it's a lot easier. But I like to get the speakers as far above people's heads as I can, so I'm not blowing out the folks in the center section. So a couple standard layouts here. Option A. Option A would give us, a three-speaker system using two of our R.5 94Z systems projecting left and right, and then we would use an R252Z for the long throw going across to the visitor side. This also happens to provide, a reasonable amount of coverage for the field also just by default. Option B, we could step up to the MAC systems. What do the MAC systems, give us over option A? Well, higher power handling, so we can have higher SPL. You can certainly boost the low frequency, a good 6 decibels, down on the bottom range of these horn-loaded speakers, and certainly get more low frequency out of them. Again, got to have the amplifier power available to it. But the added power handling of the low frequency devices, really shine in this application. And also we're going to in the R.5 96 Max as a 1.4 inch exit high frequency, and compared to the R.5 and its 1 inch, better high frequency extension, clarity. It's very good option if available. Or option C could be a little bit more involved system, based around essentially the same components. We'll move on to the next slide here. So lighting poles. We kind of jokingly call this our Texas headphone system here in the shop, because speakers are often located on the lighting poles, far left and right. And these lighting poles, they could be down on the goal line. They could be parallel with the front of the bleachers, side of the bleachers, or they could be behind the bleachers. So in this generic layout here, we're showing a long throw coverage to the visitor side from one of the poles, and we're showing our primary home side coverage, firing inward. So the options we generally consider for this configuration would be one R252Z on a light pole. Which light pole do you pick? Well, sometimes it doesn't matter, although I would certainly take a look at, okay, which direction are the most neighbors' houses in? If there were neighbors, houses, back in this direction, well, maybe I'd choose the other light pole and not put as much energy into the neighborhood. Up to you, but with a single R252Z from the home side, you can typically get about 250 feet of horizontal coverage on a visitor side. So one speaker really does go a long way when you're projecting those distances. For the for the coverage in the main seating, option A, if we're under a tight budget, the R.5 94Z could be appropriate as long as the bleachers aren't too wide. You need to ensure that the speakers will get loud enough. If these are goal line to goal line seats, you're probably not going to use R.5s. You're going to need something larger. For the wider seating, you might consider going, in option B to the R.5 96 Maxes. Again, it's sort of a budget decision, or maybe the poles just don't want to support any more weight or wind load, so that can certainly be a good option. But we still maintain the R252, and stepping up to the Max in option B, you can certainly gain about 4 or 5 dB more potential output level, on the field and over to the visitor side, and some additional low frequency, which also the home side will benefit from. Option C in this system is essentially the same. We would have a long throw. We would step up to R294s potentially. Now, we have a number of patterns of R2s available. Sometimes you find it's the R277 that works best, depending on the position of the light poles. I often find that the 70 by 70 version works best, when the poles are to the sides of the seating area. But in general, the R294Zs will provide, coverage just about everywhere you need it, and down into the lower part of the field on the track, so the cheer squad can hear also. You may have noticed that we've got 3 speakers off the face of the press box too. Kind of an optional thing we threw in here, but for the for these pole-mounted systems, we'll often say, ask the customer, if there is the potential to put some smaller speakers, maybe little R.35s or R.25s in the center, to provide higher quality sound to the booster club, who may be the ones that funded the system, honestly. But also, if they're delayed and processed properly, we can really reduce the area where we're perceiving echoes. Now, in most instances, we don't aim speakers towards each other, and that's kind of what we're doing here. It happens on athletic fields all the time. People are used to the echo. It's just how it is, and nobody really complains about it. Alternately, you might consider placing all the speakers on one light pole. Maybe you use an R252Z going across the field, and an R252 projecting the long distance, and maybe another R2 or R596 Max for the shorter throw. Keeping all the speakers in one position, will greatly reduce the echoes. But again, a lot of choices that can be made here, and a lot of ways to skin this cat, so to say. Another popular layout is from the scoreboard system. The scoreboard position can be a very economical installation point. It's generally pretty easy to mount speakers, on top of a scoreboard. The greatest challenge is there a way to get the wire there? You're 99% of the time we're having to run some heavy gauge copper, from the press box. It usually ends up being about a 500-foot cable run to the scoreboard, depending on its location. But aside from that part, if there's already a cable path, for a budget system where you want to really cover the whole stadium, a couple speakers, on the scoreboard can certainly get the job done very, very effectively. So option A, and these are always going to be R252s. You need the horsepower of the R252, which is a 50-degree horizontal pattern, 20-degree vertical pattern. It's got dual mid-ranges to make sure the voice makes it there. Because honestly, if you can't understand the voice, it doesn't matter how much boom and sizzle you have. The voice has got to come first, and that's what community has really prided itself on over the years. Yes, you can absolutely, with our available processor settings, these things can be flat and extremely musical, but you're usually going to find in stadiums that you need a little bit of extra vocal punch out of them just to get through all the noise of, well, what else? Voices, all these kids talking and cheering in the stands. So the R252Z was really designed with long projection distances in mind. If you take a look at the how far does it go chart, you'll see we can achieve 96 dB out some 200 feet. Oftentimes, by the time we get over here to the 20-yard line, we could be up to 400 feet away. Well, the difference between 200 feet and 400 feet, it's 6 decibels. In general, you lose about 6 decibels of sound, or I should say, sound pressure levels reduced by 6 decibels every doubling in distance. So if we're 96 decibels, 96 decibels at 200 feet away, you're probably going to be around, 90 decibels at 400 feet away. If you want to increase that SPL, a bit more low frequency, the R252 Max with higher low frequency output capability and high frequency capability is also certainly a step up option. Option C, option C kind of sort of reserved for those stadiums where maybe you really do have goal line to goal line seating. The example that we're showing here is short seating, but if we're goal line to goal line, you're typically using 2 R252s, whether the Maxes or the Z version. One of them is a shorter throw, and the second one, I'm usually aiming that one, a little bit, somewhere around the 35-yard line is the center of aiming for that system. A single R252Z will get the job done, but that one speaker is trying to get over, potentially, a few thousand people in the bleachers. So when we get into a scenario where it needs to be a scoreboard mounting system, or just legacy says it's going to be a scoreboard system, considering a pair of R252s, Zs or Maxes is certainly the way you want to go in order to show enough improvement over the previous system. Which if it was just some, older horns, okay, it might not be tough to do. Same goes for the visitor side. If it's a smaller seating area, a single R252Z, if it's really going goal line to goal line, you want a pair of them. In our experience, scoreboards generally will, putting additional weight and wind loading on the scoreboards is really not a problem at all. We'll get into a few more details later on in the presentation, some of the tips and tricks for these stadium systems. And so there's certainly a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of variables. What's the available mounting structure? How tall are the bleachers? How wide? How deep? What other events are they using the field for? Perhaps it makes sense to supplement the full range R series systems with a voice range system for other areas. If there's a very strong track and field program, often there may be high jumps, long jump areas out of what would be the normal bleacher coverage area. Just need to ask the customer about that. Are there auxiliary areas that you want sound specifically projected towards in order to meet the needs of all their anticipated sporting events. It's a big subject. Kind of tried to boil it down here a little bit, on the football field side, but we'll be here to help, and this is at least very, very good starting place. Next, we're going to get into baseball fields. The proliferation of sound systems on baseball and softball fields, especially these baseball and softball complexes, they're owned by the municipalities or the schools or the colleges or what have you. It's pretty amazing in the last 5 years how many systems we've been doing for baseball fields, and they can go anywhere from very, very simple systems to pretty complex. We're showing a single field system here because covering a field, whether it's one field or if there's 4 fields in a complex, you kind of do it, essentially the same way. We hope that the easiest solution again is mounting to a press box, which often in these cases you're going to have 20 feet of elevation to work with, which is really good considering the usual projection distance to the listeners. In our example, we placed 3 seating sections. We did place small seats in front. Sometimes that's all they have. Sometimes they do have seats, behind the dugouts and down the baselines. Depending on budget, size of the seating area, anticipated attendance, our option A, we're usually looking at our R.25 94Zs. These are pretty, they're compact speakers. Take a look at the how far does it go chart and decide, is that SPL enough? And also, make sure you check out the specs of these systems. Most of them that we're talking about, they are horn-loaded systems. So if a customer, is looking for, that low-frequency extension, you might steer them toward, towards a subwoofer model of some sort, especially on the football side. Baseball, we usually don't see that. Option A, R.25 94Zs can do a nice job, project sound, get that 96 decibels down, 60 feet or 60 feet or actually about 50 feet down the sidelines. Baseball is not a loud sport. You don't need to be as loud for baseball. You're not battling thousands of people, so the smaller speakers sometimes can't work. If the team or the coach or whoever is paying for the system really wants to hear sound, out on the field also, you're probably, stepping up to the R.5s. So the R.5 systems, they may be the same ones projecting down the sidelines. It could be a 90 degree by 40 degree model. Or when we get into the baseball complexes where I'm trying to focus the sound a little bit more, I might take an R5 94Z and flip it on its side. Now I've got a horizontal 40 degrees, through most of my voice band. I've got a larger vertical, but I'm not disturbing the fields close by nearly as much. All the R-Series speakers are rotatable in their yokes 90 degrees, so you can flip that pattern and take advantage of focusing the energy on the area of interest. And certainly if the team is expecting or wants to hear sound on the field, the smallest thing you want to hear, use is an R.5 if they want to reach beyond the infield with sound. Option C is the step up. We get into the R.5 96 max. Again, we can kick up the low frequency a little bit more. It doesn't go lower in frequency. You can just have more of it, and certainly have a higher quality listening experience. So press box systems, they come in lots of shapes and flavors and configurations. We'll move to again, I'd prefer to have the speakers further away from the people if possible, and if the lighting poles are available and there's you've got conduit, to the light poles. If I can put them on the poles, I can get much more even sound pressure level spread. Get them 35, 40 feet up on a pole, or sometimes the limiting factor is how tall is the district's bucket truck, depending on how the systems are getting up there. And you can cover a lot of area. You'll still have some of the perceived echoes if you're more than about 30 or 40 feet off center. But sometimes lighting poles is a way to go. Perhaps the press box is non-existent. But we can pull them out, these two. We can also provide more even field coverage without blasting out the people in front of the press box, because we want to project sound towards the field. So the typical systems that we would consider for this is our R.35 3896. We do need something bigger than the R.25 typically. So the three-way 3896 does a very good job addressing seating all the way towards behind home plate, and can do an admirable job on the field also. To step up the low frequency output, the R.5s going from an 8-inch and the R.35 3896 to the 12-inch can add more perceived musicality. And again, going up to the max system, if we just want louder, want higher output, they really like to rock. The R.5 96 max is a very good option to consider also. All right, next one, soccer fields. There's a whole lot of soccer complexes going up in our area, probably your area also. Lots of different configurations of these. Have come up with kind of some of the the general layout suggestions for for these facilities. Usually you just have to cover one sideline. You're not always needing to cover the entire field. The spacing of the poles, and the position of the poles really, guide you to whether or not option A is plausible or not with the R.25s. Because, soccer fields are usually somewhere 300 to 360 feet sideline, and depending on where the seating is, or if everybody just brings their lawn chairs, the R.25, it could be a budget solution for for a facility that just doesn't have sound right now. For higher intensity sound, longer projection distances, the R.35 3896 can also be a very good option. And if they want a bit more low frequency extension in the system, I usually find we get into the smaller collegiate fields, they're willing to spend a bit more money. The R.5s, whether it's in this case, I pointed out the 66Z. It could be a 90 by 40 also. It just depends on how much you want to contain the sound to the seating area. The Maxes also certainly get the job done also. Second configuration, where we do want to provide some coverage, on the field, or the pitch, as they call it in the rest of the world. Option A, perhaps we've got use the 3896s as the in-firing systems from the poles. Again, look at the how far does it go chart. How far between, how far apart are those speakers? Are they on the corners of the field? Maybe, the smallest thing I'd consider, would be an R5 or an R5 Max if I'm trying to project 150 feet. It really comes down to where are the listeners. Maybe there's a temporary bleachers, maybe it's a lawn chair show. Just got to talk to the customer, find out the expectations. Perhaps they do other things in the field. Maybe summer they have coaching clinics, something of that sort. That's certainly a very good selling point for having on-field coverage. Again, whether it's the R.35 3896 is an option A, or option B, stepping up to the R5s. Maybe coaches, on the sideline or on the field, teaching the kids fundamentals. It's pretty popular to throw a microphone or wireless microphone on the instructors in order to be able to address the entire field. Or maybe there's just other functions that happen on the field where the customer could benefit from wider coverage, of the playing surface. Just like with the football, there's a few different directions that you can go with this. So you just got to qualify your customers' wants and needs. Another system that's, configuration that's semi-popular, often we're finding that they'll either have a scoreboard midfield on the opposite side, or they'll have a press box. And that may be the team side of the field over there, and all the patrons, the parents, they're over here on this side. Again, have to consider the needs of the space, but an R252Z, that 50-degree horizontal pattern at about 250 feet away, will give you about 250 feet of horizontal coverage between the 6 dB down points. Soccer doesn't tend to be a very loud sport on these smaller fields, so you don't need a ton of SPL. If you're achieving 85, 90 decibels in the listening area, typically you can have a happy customer and everybody will be able to hear good, intelligible speech, whether it's announcements, national anthem, what have you. This system also is putting a fair amount of energy on the field. Again, maybe it's just convenient to place a sound system on that press box on the far side or scoreboard, but be aware that there's going to be a fair amount of energy on the field, and some people may be more sensitive to that than others. Option B would be to provide really solid sideline to sideline coverage using a couple of R252Zs. And option C, well, you can max it out again if they really want, more performance, more low frequency, better high frequency extension. The R252 Maxes are seeming to find their way into a lot more of the collegiate fields, especially point source systems, because it's not just the games. They're out there during practice. Somebody's plugging their iPod in, and they're cranking the system up. And the Maxes will certainly help motivate the players and the staff, and let everybody have a good time experiencing the sound system. So a few different options. Generally, less infrastructure to deal with, or less mounting, fewer mounting options, on the soccer facilities, but a few different directions that you can look here. Okay, we're gonna bring things indoors. We've really been focusing on the outdoor applications of the systems, but I'll bet 40% of the systems, the R series systems that I sell actually go indoors, usually into highly reverberant spaces. You need to qualify these spaces, the acoustics, where we don't have to deal with as much outside, it's much more forgiving. Worst thing that's usually going to happen is an echo to or a late arrival from a speaker, or potentially a reflection off a building. But indoors, where we get these, you have a typical gym that really, holds the sound and has a reverb time associated with it. Certainly need to do your homework on the facility and make sure you're picking the appropriate speaker. But the R.5 systems, R.35 systems have proven to be winners in these spaces. Aside from ease of install, often you can just beam clamp the speakers up, attach the appropriate safety. It's a fast installation as compared to doing a bunch of rigging. Also can make it very economical for the customer. So option A for a cost-effective system here, I almost never do center clusters. Center clusters in gyms is usually just a recipe for a bad listening experience. Always placing the speakers firing into the audience faces. It could be 3 wide, it could be 4 wide, just depends on how wide the seating is. These days I find that most of the seats are, the seating arrangements, they're end to end of the court and maybe a little wider, in which case you'll often find you need 4 systems. But on a budget, maybe 3 systems. We're going to use the available steel beams in the place to clamp these systems too. Running them, often they'll be 70-volt systems just because it's easy. So for option A, we've got 3 of the 3896s on each side of the bleachers, usually right over the edge of the court. The bleachers can be up to about 20 feet, 22 feet tall, and that 60-degree or 40-degree vertical pattern will cover, it'll give you enough vertical pattern. Need to make sure you're getting everybody, but let's take any excess pattern and make sure we focus it down on the floor, not splash it off the upper walls. The court system, a couple of simple 3896s aiming up and down the court. Option B, step up to the R5s, a little bit more low frequency, better pattern control. Few gyms actually sound good, but when you need to focus the energy as much as possible, and generally you can't hang a speaker lower than 26 feet in a typical high school gym. Some of these ceilings, the steel, boy, it's up there at 35, 40 feet. The compact systems lend themselves to the lower steel since they'll stay out. They'll stay out of the stay out of the way of the ball. They won't become an obstruction for that last second Hail Mary shot from the other end of the court. Although I will say we've had our R5s tested, and some places they're actually certified as ball proof. That's a whole nother story though. But the R.5s, generally it's a good balance between pattern control, output capability. I can easily put 100 dB of music energy and announcer energy into every seat using the R.5s. Option C, again, if they want to step it up, the R.5 Max systems. stick with the R.5s on the floor in the center. Next configuration, we'll talk about enhanced court coverage. This would be, this is providing, a better arrangement, especially if they're doing seated events in the space. We're providing, basically a glorified ceiling speaker system in addition to the usual sports system. Often they're active at the same time, but if somebody has any plans on a seated event or doing a commencement or what have you in here, this is certainly the better option. Option A, the options for the bleachers essentially are unchanged. The court coverage, for a budget system, the R.25s, again, hanging from that, 26 feet to 30 feet high, projecting down onto the court. Very good system. Using the R.25s essentially as ceiling speakers. I rarely use pendants in these scenarios. First of all, they'll swing back and forth due to the HVAC, and they make good targets for the balls also. The R.35 coax is our 10-inch coaxial system in an outdoor shell. Provides wider coverage, about 110 degrees conical. If the room's a little bit better behaved acoustically, maybe it's got a soft ceiling, could be a good option. Or if you want to ensure good intelligibility, usually the R.599Zs, using the larger mouth, larger horn loading, horn loading to a lower frequency, having these distributed over the court can be a very good way to go. And these basketball arenas also, they're another place where where low frequency augmentation is often desired. I'd say about half of the systems that get laid out and we have sell-through on, they've got some sort of low frequency augmentation in them now. We're putting a double 15 subwoofer or two either up on a couple of the beams, or depending on how the bleachers collapse against the wall, boy, you can put them down on the floor also. Just got to check out, see if that scenario will work for you. But a couple double 15, subwoofers right under the bleachers will certainly provide that visceral effect that people are looking for. Might do it on just the home side, might be on the visitor side. Again, I try and keep subwoofers close to people. They're low sensitivity devices compared to the full range systems. So let's keep the sound sources close to to our listeners. But subwoofers in gyms, yeah, it's very common thing these days. As it is with the football fields. Also, we're seeing a lot more subwoofers designed in and installed into the football fields also. Okay, get through a few tips here. So we have some time for Q&A. Loudspeaker mounting heights. I didn't get too specific, but adequately above ear level compared to the furthest listener you are trying to reach. It's usually a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio, at least how high the speaker is above listeners' ears, depending on pole mounting location, press box, or whatever. All systems benefit from DSP, properly set limiters, and high-pass filters are a must. There's not a speaker out there that doesn't need a high-pass filter. Make sure you have an appropriate one in your processing based on our specification sheets. A compressor on the PA mic in a stadium system, well, any sports system is very desirable. Let's get a compressor on that PA mic if we can, so we're not just using the DSP limiters to keep things protected. Let's put a properly set compressor on there. Outdoor rated cable's a must. Westpan AquaSeal is one of our favorites around here. 10 or 12 gauge twisted and appropriately jacketed. I don't want parallel pulls of cable and metal conduit. Many amplifiers really don't like that. Let's use twisted cable for these long runs. And don't use shielded speaker cable. 99.9% of the time you don't need it. Light pole power is not going to interfere with speaker level signals. Cable and metal conduits, good protection against lightning damage, but disconnecting the speakers from the amplifier when the system powers down via relays is great protection against lightning. A couple other notes here. 100-volt systems should be considered for 400-watt or higher power systems. It's a deep subject, but we're happy to talk with you about it. When loading matters, consult a PE or ME for all mounting of systems. And the old adage, just because you can project sound 500 feet doesn't mean you should. The distance between the speaker and listener is Mother Nature's playground. A lot can happen over those distances. We have software support for all the models I've discussed and many more. EaseFocus is, a very popular platform these days. You can download these from our site. And for more in-depth education, certainly recommend our friends at Synergetic Audio Concepts, prosoundtraining.com. Great online courses that go very deep into subjects that really make a difference in the outcome of your sound systems. We have the Technical Applications group here at Community. Happy to answer your questions as far as proper application of our speaker systems. And I think we're to the Q&A point.
Thank you very much, and we have had some folks write in with some questions. So first one right now. Our writer said they're considering adding some of I-series of weatherized subwoofers to existing football stadium, probably the dual 15. They're asking, how critical is time alignment?
So for subwoofers, the critical time alignment, yes, I try to get things to arrive at the same time. Depending on whether you're putting just a lump of subs in the middle underneath the bleachers, or if you're spacing them apart maybe on the 30-yard lines, I will align those to the full range systems. You can only really time align things for a 30 to 40-foot area, but you do want to align the subwoofers with the full range systems.
Another question is asking about just the dot in the stands. Question has to do, what does that do to the frequency response of the system, and generally what sort of allowance you make for out of sound spot soak up? In particular, they're talking about a basketball.
I think I got most of your question. Internet's having some fun with us here, but as far as the effects of sound on in these facilities, so indoors, I typically find when we're commissioning a sound system in an empty room that I'm leaving a bit more mid-range. Actually, indoors and outdoors, I'm leaving a bit more mid-range in these systems than necessarily sounds right. So once we put a bunch of people into the seats, a lot of that sound that's bouncing around, especially indoors, is going to be absorbed by the patrons. And also, football systems, depending on the climate of the area, depending on whether people have their winter jackets on or lighter jackets on, that'll make a difference too. They're larger absorbers. I find indoors, I'm attenuating low frequency a little bit more in the indoor spaces before people, the first events. Outdoors, low frequency absorption usually isn't as much of an issue as we don't get that room gain that we have, for, say, an indoor basketball type space.
If I see a couple of just popped up on the screen here, I'm trying to absorb. Get topic for presentation. Community does a great job. They're thankful for that. Designed a few systems for the customer. Coverage was perfect. The question they're writing here, is it acceptable to utilize R35 3896 for the basketball court filters instead of R.35 coax, or were they chosen for some specific reason?
As far as a floor coverage system, the coaxes work quite well in a more reverberant space, and every gym's reverberant. But I would say where I decide, am I using a horn-loaded device like a 3896 versus something like an R35 coax? I would I would be more inclined to use the horn-loaded 3896 system in a basketball arena that just had a hard metal roof. One that's a little bit friendlier, maybe it does have some fiberglass insulation, whether it's loose or it actually has some tectum on the ceiling. Then I feel a bit more comfortable suggesting using a coaxial system that has a lower Q but does cover a wider area per speaker. We're battling room acoustics here, so there's no one answer.
Makes sense. Dave, that's all I've got on the screen at the moment. So questions have been addressed. At this point, I want to remind folks this has been recorded. This part or co-workers that would benefit from part of the presentation. It was a recorded presentation, and it is available to us or available to you through FDW Corporation. Dave, thank you very much for joining us today. I urge everyone to take advantage of the opportunity to fill out the surveys that we have on the site before you leave. Please do fill that out. That information helps us as we plan our next webinar. And as always, we're always looking at topics. So if people do have topics they would like us to address, we'll certainly pay that attention to try and schedule something.